The next thing we need to concern ourselves with is a piece of configuration that will tell this JPA where to connect to and then also which entities it needs to manage. And for that, we'll create a new directory in this resources here. And it needs to be called this exactly. So the same words with the dash and the same casing. External tools or libraries know to go look into in this directory for things. And then we need a persistence.xml file, also with this exact name. So this is an XML file, so we can specify this version and the encoding. And then we start out with this persistence element. This is a top level element. It did pre-fill some XML namespace, but that's actually not correct. I'm going to use another one, and that's going to be this XML nsjcp.org. And then with this one, we can specify a version. And that's going to be 2.1. And there we go. We have our top level element. Within this persistence element, we have persistence units. And these units contain the configuration for a specific database. So in this case, this will be the MariaDb CTX. I'm just going to call this a context. And then we have three sections pretty much. The first one is a provider. And this is going to be the translation layer between our Java application and the JPA and then our MariaDB. So in this case, we'll have provider here, and we're making use of the Hibernate persistence provider. So with my IDE, it sort of filled out all of this stuff automatically, but this is coming from those dependencies that we added in our build.gradle file. The next bit of config we need going to be the entities to manage. Now, because we're using JPA directly, with a console application pretty much, we need to give it all of this information. If you're using a framework like Spring or there are tools and things that are set up that will take care of this automatically. But in our case, we need to specify these classes and we simply give it the fully qualified name. So the first one is going to be account, and that should put in the fully qualified name. And then the next one is going to be the trade class. So that now tells this persistence unit that these are the entities that it needs to manage. And then finally, we have database properties, and these are contained within a properties element. The property itself, the individual properties, are key value pairs. So we have a name and a value. And then the first four are related to the database. So the names of these are going to be fully qualified names. So we'll start off with the jakarta.persistence.jdbc properties. These are the things like the connection string and the driver that we're using. So let's start out with the URL. And that's going to be a JDBC MariaDB URL. This is running on localhost 3306. And also the database that I'm running is called TradeDB. So that's it for the first property. Then the next, I'll simply copy and paste that line. The user is going to be root. The password is configured as secret123 in my compose file. And then finally the driver here. This one is coming from org.mariadb.jdbc.driver. So that does it for our database connection properties. The next two properties are related to Hibernate. Let's see here, Hibernate properties. And these have to do with the dialect. So which dialect should Hibernate use? And in this case, it's going to be a MariaDB dialect. So it's the same thing, property. And then it's going to be the dialect. Let's see here, org.hibernate.dialect. And the value here is going to come from this org.hibernate.dialect.MariaDB dialect. And then the final property has to do with how this JPA should go about keeping the model, entity models, in sync with our SQL database. So it has to do with creating the database or updating it, like the schema. And the property name here is hibernate.hbm2ddl.auto. And let's go with a create option. So there are a few options available for this, but let's just take a look at create for now. And to make sure that this is working, it's going to be as simple as instantiating one of these entity managers, and that's it. That will create that schema. So let's see here in our main method, I'm going to have an entity manager factory. Call this my factory. And this comes from persistence.create entity manager factory. And then we give it a persistence unit name. And if we go to our persistence XML file, this is going to be our persistence unit name attribute value. I'll just paste this in here. It's telling me that this is used without a try with resources. So it's a good idea to just wrap this in a try with resources block, and that should do the trick. The next thing that we need is a context or an entity manager. And this one can also go into the try with resources. So I can say create, so I can ask my factory to create an entity manager. And this should kind of do the trick. Let's see here, I'll run this main method and then we get some output. So now if I go back to my add miner, see here, this is the old page that I had. So now if I refresh this or navigate back to my table, my database overview and hit this TradeDB option, we see here there's now the account table and the trade table. And here we go. I can click on this select word here and that will then select the data. There's nothing in there, but this confirms that those tables were created based on my entities. I can click on that and then see the fields or the columns. So we have balance, account ID, and username. Let's take a look at the trade table. There's the trade ID, and then finally we have this account ID. This is a varchar, so it corresponds with the data type of our account table, so the primary key there. And in our entities, this is actually the whole object. So we'll see how to interact with those things later on. But for now, that does it for the persistence.xml and also verifying that it's set up correctly.